The scent of aging paper and lavender always anchored me, a quiet comfort in the small, rented room above Mrs. Gable's bakery where I stitched bridal gowns, each silken stitch a prayer for a future I was certain would remain exactly as dull and safe as the present. I remember that Tuesday afternoon with a clarity that chills me still, the weak winter sun attempting to warm the dusty windowpane and my fingers, nimble from years of delicate work, tracing the embroidered script on a swatch of satin, the order slip demanding a dress for a woman named Clara Vance, a name as ethereal as the fabric itself, yet the instructions were stark, almost harsh. Must be ready by the first full moon of the new year. No exceptions, no questions. It was an anomaly in my predictable life of hems and lace, a piece of correspondence that felt weighted with unseen history, and as I held the thick, cream-colored paper, a faint, almost inaudible sound, like the deep, resonant thrum of a distant cello, seemed to vibrate through the floorboards, a vibration that settled not in my ears but deep in my chest, a place usually reserved only for the mundane anxieties of rent and needle breakage. I looked around the small room, the sewing machine silent, the street noise outside muffled, searching for the source of the resonance, but found nothing, only the familiar sight of my neatly organized thread spools and the half-finished bodice catching the light. Yet the feeling persisted, a subtle hum beneath the surface of my reality, a feeling that something vast and important was about to walk through that very door, not as a bride, but perhaps as the architect of an entirely different, much more dangerous design, leaving me with the undeniable impression that the quiet life I cherished was already fracturing at the seams, foreshadowed by the strange, almost metallic scent that lingered momentarily where the letter had rested, a scent utterly out of place in a room smelling only of flour and fabric glue. The unsettling hum faded but left an echo, a constant, low-level awareness that prickled the skin along my arms whenever I stepped outside, and the town of Havenwood, usually so predictable with its gossip and familiar faces, began to feel like a stage set where the actors were subtly rearranging their positions when I wasn't looking. The change wasn't dramatic, no sudden monster attacks or flying carriages, but rather a series of emotionally stirring anomalies that chipped away at my certainty. I found myself drawn repeatedly to the edge of the dense blackwood forest bordering the town, a place locals whispered about with superstitious caution, compelled by an invisible tether that tightened whenever the moon waxed. And once, while delivering a simple repair to old Mr. Hemlock, I caught my reflection in his darkened parlor window, but for a fraction of a second, my eyes weren't the familiar hazel, but a startling deep amber that vanished the instant I blinked, leaving me breathless and questioning my own sanity. My sleep became restless, filled not with nightmares of the past I desperately tried to escape, the shadowy figure, the desperate flight, but with vivid sensory dreams of running through moonlit woods, the earth cool beneath my bare feet, and the overwhelming, intoxicating scent of pine and something wild and powerful, a scent that always coincided with the feeling of being fiercely, urgently protected. Even my hands, usually steady enough to manage the finest French knots, started to tremble slightly whenever a certain powerful, low-pitched rumble of an engine passed the bakery, a sound too deep for a standard truck, too deliberate for a mere passing car, suggesting a massive presence that commanded silence in its wake. I started noticing a shadow, always just at the periphery of vision, too tall, too quick, that seemed to linger near the alley entrance where I sometimes took my evening walk, a presence that never moved closer when observed directly, but whose absence felt like a sudden, terrifying drop in temperature, leaving me with the strange, bewildering knowledge that I was being watched not by a predator, but perhaps by something that considered me its most guarded treasure, a thought both terrifying and inexplicably comforting, leaving me wondering if the careful walls I'd built around my heart were finally beginning to crumble under the pressure of something far older and far more magnetic than I could rationally comprehend. The day the sheriff finally came into the shop was not marked by a sudden announcement or dramatic entrance, but by the simple, startling cessation of all ambient sound, as if the entire world outside had pressed the mute button just for him. He stood framed in the doorway, not imposing in the way a brute might be, but possessing a stillness that suggested coiled, immense power held tightly in check, and the air in the small room immediately grew dense, heavy with an unfamiliar gravity that made breathing shallow and deliberate. His eyes, when they finally met mine across the cluttered worktable, were the color of storm clouds just before the first lightning strike, a profound, troubled gray that seemed to see straight through the cheap calico of my apron and into the fragile core of my secrets. He wasn't asking about a dress or a lost dog. He simply asked for my name, his voice a low, gravelly current that bypassed my intellect and resonated directly with that strange, humming spot in my chest, a sound that felt instantly, irrevocably familiar, like hearing the opening chord of a song I'd known my entire life but forgotten I loved. The chemistry was immediate, undeniable, a raw, almost painful recognition that scorched away the years of carefully constructed isolation I'd nurtured since fleeing the darkness of my past, and I fumbled for words, my usual practiced politeness dissolving into nervous stammers, while he remained utterly composed, his gaze unwavering, conveying a silent promise of safety so potent it was almost suffocating. I couldn't explain the sudden, fierce desire to trust him implicitly, to lay down the burden of my constant vigilance at his feet, yet something in his reserved posture, the way his large hands remained loosely clasped before him, suggested he too was fighting an internal battle, a restraint that mirrored my own terror of connection. He introduced himself only as Sheriff Caelan Thorne, a name that sounded like iron and shadow, and when he finally moved, it was with an almost fluid grace that defied his rugged appearance, stopping just at the edge of my workspace, not invading, but simply existing in my orbit, an undeniable gravitational pull that made my carefully ordered world tilt precariously, leaving me with the unsettling, intoxicating certainty that this man, this unexpected shadow, was the answer to the deepest unvoiced question of my solitary existence, a question I hadn't even dared to ask until he walked in. Caelan Thorne became a fixture, a quiet anchor in the turbulent waters that began to churn just beneath Havenwood's placid surface. He didn't court me with flowers or letters but with presence, a regular visit to check on the town's needs, which invariably meant spending an hour leaning against the doorframe while I stitched, the silence between us growing richer and more meaningful than any conversation could achieve. The dreams intensified, no longer just sensory experiences but glimpses, flashes of silver light, the overwhelming smell of wet earth after a hard rain, and the distinct, unnerving image of Caelan, not in his starched uniform, but clad in something wilder, his face set in a fierce, protective mask under the stark moonlight, his silhouette unmistakably powerful. The coincidences were too numerous to ignore. Whenever I felt a flicker of the old fear, the sensation of being hunted, Caelan would appear shortly after, not stating why he was there, but his mere arrival seemed to push the shadows back, calming the frantic beat of my heart with a look that promised imminent, absolute defense. My logic screamed that this was obsession, projection of my own desperate need for salvation onto the first strong man I encountered, but my body reacted with a visceral certainty that bypassed all rational thought, responding to his proximity with a deep, settling warmth, a feeling akin to finally finding the exact perfect temperature after a lifetime of shivering. One afternoon, while I was struggling to lift a heavy bolt of damask fabric, Caelan crossed the room in a single silent stride, and before I could protest, his hand settled beneath mine, the contact brief, yet sending a surge of energy through me so profound it felt like an electrical current had bypassed my skin entirely, charging my very bones. In that shared moment of unexpected physical connection, I saw it, a flash in his gray eyes, a fleeting glimpse of something golden, wild, and undeniably non-human, gone before I could focus, but the impact lingered, a powerful, unmistakable sign that the man who swore to protect me was bound to the very mystery I had tried so hard to outrun. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, settling the unsettled dust of my suspicions. Caelan Thorne was not just a protective sheriff. He was a piece of the wild world, a secret keeper, and I, the fugitive seamstress, was deeply, irrevocably entangled in his existence. The unspoken truth of Caelan's nature, that he was something extraordinary, something powerful that dwelled on the fringes of the known world, did not drive me away. Instead, it forged an ironclad trust, a bond built not on mutual comfort but on shared, terrifying secrets. Our conversations became deeper, meandering from the practicalities of Havenwood's small-town politics to the philosophy of loneliness, each exchange peeling back another layer of caution. He spoke little of his past, always redirecting the focus onto my dreams, my fears, the quiet resilience I showed every day, treating my fear not as a weakness to be cured, but as a historical reality to be honored, and, in turn, I found myself responding to his quiet intensity with unguarded honesty, sharing the weight of my flight, the phantom presence of the man who hunted me, never naming him, but letting Caelan sense the danger that clung to me like cheap perfume. One evening, as a genuine, unexpected snow began to fall, coating the town in a silencing blanket, He didn't leave when the sun dipped below the horizon. Instead, he sat across from me while I worked on Clara Vance's dress, the pristine white satin reflecting the soft glow of my desk lamp, and he reached out, his large, calloused fingers surprisingly gentle as he traced the intricate silver thread I was using for the bodice, his touch sending a familiar, resonant thrum through my core. "This stitching," he murmured, his voice raspy with emotion. "It requires patience, precision, and a deep, inherent understanding of structure. You build things to last, Clara." His acknowledgement, spoken with such rare sincerity, shattered the remaining reserve I held, and I looked up, meeting his gaze, the intensity in his eyes softening into an expression of aching tenderness, a warmth that felt like coming home after decades lost in the cold. I confessed, not with words but with a simple, profound gesture, placing my hand directly over his on the shimmering fabric, a silent offering of my vulnerability. And in that moment of pure, unadulterated connection, the protective barriers around both of us seemed to dissolve, replaced by a shared understanding that transcended mere attraction, evolving into a deep, soulful recognition of two halves finally finding their whole. Yet just as the warmth threatened to consume me, Kalen's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, his gaze flickering toward the window, his protective instinct snapping back into place with alarming speed, an abrupt tension that suggested whatever danger I had fled was not only still present but was perhaps closer than ever before, alerted perhaps by the sudden surge of shared emotional energy. The next day brought the letter, a heavy, sealed parchment, delivered not by the postman, but slipped silently under the door, bearing no return address, only the seal of a crest I recognized instantly from the blurred nightmares of my escape, the coiled serpent intertwined with a single stylized raven's wing, the sigil of the ancient, ruthless coven I had run from, the ones who specialized in claiming human legacies through forced supernatural bonds. My hands shook so violently I could barely tear the seal, and Kalen, who had arrived minutes before, stood silently behind me, his presence a solid wall against the rising tide of panic, his body tense, ready to spring. The letter was a chillingly formal demand for my return, citing a broken contract, mentioning the stolen lineage I carried, and then the devastating confirmation. The writer claimed Kalen Thorne was not merely a protector but an agent, a highly placed wolf warden assigned by the very council that sought to control me, tasked originally with monitoring my flight, not safeguarding my freedom. The revelation struck me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs and shattering the fragile foundation of trust Kalen and I had built. I turned, my face surely a mask of betrayal, ready to scream accusations, but Kalen stood utterly still, his gray eyes clouded with a profound, heartbreaking agony, and in that moment, the wildness I had glimpsed in him clarified, the golden light, the protective ferocity. He was not just a werewolf, he was of the elder line, a creature bound by ancient, unbreakable laws, and his duty had placed him as my jailer, not my rescuer. "It's true, Clara," he admitted, his voice rough, stripped bare of all its practiced composure. "My initial orders, they were to observe, to bring you back intact to face judgment for abandoning your claim." The admission hung in the air, heavy with the weight of deception, the beauty of our growing bond now tainted by the ugly reality of duty and manipulation, leaving me staring at the man I loved, realizing that the wolf at my door had worn the uniform of a savior, and now I had to reconcile the genuine tenderness I felt for him with the cold, undeniable fact that his entire presence in my life had begun as an assignment. The shop suddenly felt like a cage, the silk and lace mocking the chaos. Churning within me, the truth that Kalen was my appointed warden forced an immediate, agonizing divergence between my heart and my survival instinct. I backed away slowly, putting the work table between us, the polished wood a temporary barrier against the raw emotion radiating off him. "So, every shared silence, every comforting look," I managed, the words tasting like ash, "was just efficient surveillance? You were cataloging my weaknesses before bringing me back to them." Kalen took a single, slow step forward, his posture shifting from the controlled stillness of the sheriff to the coiled readiness of a beast denied its territory. "No," he stated, the single word weighted with desperate sincerity. "The orders were the starting point. The man you see now was not part of the briefing. You broke the contract, Clara, but you also broke the structure of my existence. My duty shifted the moment I realized what they intended to do with you. What they intended to bind you to." The world outside seemed to reflect our internal storm. The mild winter day curdled into a sudden violent hailstorm, the pellets drumming against the glass with percussive force, and I could hear the distant familiar howl, a sound that sent an icy spike of fear through me. But this time, the howl sounded territorial, predatory, aimed at our small sanctuary. The coven was closing in, alerted by the powerful shift in Kalen's allegiance, the very energy of his defiance broadcasting our location. I looked at the half-finished bridal gown, the symbol of a life I thought I could build, and knew it was a lie. The life I wanted was here with him, but that desire demanded I accept the danger he represented, the inherent conflict of his nature, forcing a choice: retreat into the safety of loneliness or step fully into the storm alongside a man whose entire identity was built on control, now willfully choosing chaos for my sake. The choice crystallized when a shadow, not Kalen's but a lean, sharp silhouette, darted past the window, confirming the immediate threat, and I knew hesitation meant destruction for both of us. I had to decide right then: would I run again, or would I stand and fight beside the man who had deceptively, yet truly become my wolf? My answer was not spoken but demonstrated. I swept the intricate gown materials off the table, clearing a space not for a weapon but for Kalen, a gesture that prioritized our immediate defense over the illusion of normalcy. Seeing my commitment, the tension in Kalen visibly eased, replaced by a fierce, almost overwhelming resolve. He finally told me the truth about my heritage, explaining that the lineage I carried was not just one of lineage, but of latent magical potential, a rare type of earthbound magic that the ruling coven desperately wanted to harness or eradicate. They didn't just want you to marry into their structure, Kalen explained, his voice low but steady, the sheriff's authority returning, now focused entirely on our survival. They wanted to bind you to a creature of their choosing, a parasitic bond to leech your strength. My original task was to verify your vulnerability, to ensure you were ripe for claiming. He paused, running a hand through his dark hair, revealing the vulnerability beneath the stoicism. But you weren't vulnerable, Clara. You were surviving. You built a life from nothing, sustained by sheer willpower. That strength, it's what I was supposed to neutralize, but instead it captivated me. He revealed that his own power, the alpha lineage, was tethered to a stringent code of honor that explicitly forbade the subjugation of a pure heart. His initial monitoring had morphed into genuine guardianship the moment he witnessed my quiet fortitude, a truth that resonated deeply because it validated the unwavering protection I had felt all along. It hadn't been surveillance. It had been devotion disguised by duty. The twist came when he confessed the depth of his own sacrifice. To defy the council openly is to invite their full wrath, not just upon me, but upon every soul under my jurisdiction. I chose you over the pact, Clara. I chose the unstable truth of this moment over the established order of my entire life. This was the turning point, the moment the deception was fully redeemed by the magnitude of his subsequent loyalty. He wasn't just protecting me from the past. He was actively severing himself from his entire powerful world for my sake, a sacrifice so immense it silenced the lingering doubt, confirming that our bond was not a consequence of fate, but a deliberate, heroic choice made on both our parts. The stability Kalen's confession brought was fleeting, a deceptive calm before the final surge. The coven did not wait for a formal confrontation. They sent their agents, not brutes but individuals skilled in subtle psychological warfare, designed to fracture Kalen's resolve by targeting the very thing he held most dear, our trust. Subtle rumors began to circulate in Havenwood, whispers planted like venomous seeds, that I was using Kalen's power to secure my own safety, that my past involved far darker compromises than Kalen knew, that our love was a calculated political move on my part to gain a powerful werewolf ally. The strain began to show in Kalen's eyes, the gray darkening with fatigue and mistrust, not of me directly, but of the impossible situation he had dragged us into. One afternoon, he found a small, antique silver locket hidden beneath my mattress, a trinket I had kept since childhood, believing it harmless, and I watched the transformation, the shift from trusted partner back to warden as he examined it, his features hardening, the scent of ozone surrounding him betraying the fierce, barely contained transformation beneath his skin. "What is this, Clara?" he demanded, holding up the locket. "This isn't the trinket of a simple seamstress. This is keyed to the old wards." The accusation, though unspoken, hung heavy between us, revealing that even after his confession, he still feared I held essential truths back, afraid that the history I fled was not merely persecution, but active complicity. My heart splintered. I couldn't bear the weight of his doubt, the fear that our love wasn't enough to overcome the legacy of lies we both carried, and in a moment of pure wounded reaction, I told him the one thing I hadn't dared reveal, the identity of the man who hunted me, the manipulative patriarch whose influence permeated every facet of my past, and in doing so, I unintentionally handed the coven their greatest weapon, the knowledge of who controlled my escape. Kaelin's reaction was immediate and devastating. Realizing my silence had been a shield for him as much as for myself, he pushed me away, not physically but emotionally, his gaze distant, haunted by the realization of the true scale of the danger, a danger that now implicated his entire territory. The separation was agonizing, a profound emotional chasm opening between us as he declared he had to handle this alone, to draw the fire away from Havenwood, his final words echoing my deepest fear. "You need to disappear again, Clara. If they take you, they take everything." The separation shattered me. The quiet of the shop became deafening, the scent of lavender replaced by the metallic tang of impending conflict, and I refused to run. I wouldn't let Kaelin walk into the fire alone, not when I knew the core of the enemy's strategy. They wanted to use my lineage to control him, and he was walking willingly into the trap. I found him at the edge of the Blackwood, standing sentinel beneath the waxing moon, his silhouette immense and impossibly lonely, preparing for the assault, his face grim, etched with the cost of his selfless decision. I approached slowly, deliberately, holding the magnificent, terrifying bridal gown I had finished, the one meant for the captive bride, and held it out not as a symbol of surrender but of defiance. "You want to draw the fire? Then stand with me," I cried, my voice surprisingly steady against the gathering storm, the wind whipping the satin fabric around me like a banner of war. "You think this threat is about my past? It's about us, Kaelin. If I run, they win by proving you're weak. If I stay, we fight them on our ground, on our terms." He turned, his eyes blazing with a fierce mixture of anger and adoration, the amber flickering dangerously close to the surface, recognizing the sheer courage it took for the fugitive to stand her ground against her pursuers. The confrontation wasn't a physical fight, but a battle of wills fought against the encroaching darkness of the coven forces massing just beyond the tree line. Kaelin stepped toward me, his voice a low growl of warning. "They will break you trying to get to me," he countered, every inch of him radiating protective instinct. "I can't watch that happen again." The words implied a history I didn't know, a tragedy preceding our meeting, and in that desperate instant I reached out, closing the final distance, my hands gripping his rugged lapels, looking directly into the heart of the storm in his eyes. "Then don't watch me fight alone," I whispered, sealing the promise. As if in answer, the first wave of the coven's shadowy agents broke through the treeline, not with overt violence, but with chilling binding enchantments designed to neutralize Kaelin's raw power, sending him staggering back, momentarily ensnared by the ethereal ropes of dark magic, his massive form struggling against an invisible constraint, leaving me exposed, standing alone in the moonlight, clutching the white satin, facing down the darkness that had chased me for years, knowing that our combined defense was the only thing that stood between Havenwood and annihilation. The moment Kaelin fell, constrained by the binding spells, was the absolute emotional nadir, a stark realization that his immense power was neutralized by the intricate political web I had tried to escape. The coven leader, a figure radiating cold, controlled malice, stepped forward, sneering at Kaelin's helplessness and then focusing entirely on me, recognizing the raw, untapped power humming beneath my skin. "The marriage contract stands, girl," the leader hissed. "You will be bound, and your wolf will be ours." This was the ultimate test. Surrender and save Kaelin from the consequences of his betrayal, or fight and risk his execution as a traitor. I looked at Kaelin, trapped but watching me with desperate intensity, and the choice became achingly clear. My freedom was meaningless without his soul intact. I dropped the wedding dress, letting the silk pool around my feet like a fallen shroud, and I stepped into the clearing not as a victim, but as the inheritor of the lineage they so coveted. I lifted my hands not to fight their bindings, but to meet their magic head-on, focusing every ounce of my innate, earthbound strength, the resilience born of years of running and stitching my life back together, not on defense, but on a radical act of severance. I didn't attack the coven. Instead, I channeled my energy outward directly into Kaelin's magical bonds, overloading the parasitic connection they were attempting to form, not to break the spell, but to channel my own lineage power through it. creating a painful, blinding feedback loop directed back at the coven's manipulative magic. The backlash was instantaneous and spectacular. A wave of pure, brilliant emerald light erupted from my core, shattering the dark bindings around Kaelin with a sound like breaking ice. While the coven leader recoiled, their own dark energy momentarily turned against them, staggering back in shock and pain. Kaelin was free, roaring not in anger, but in released power, his transformation complete, the Alpha. Standing fully realized, his golden eyes blazing with purpose, and together our combined presence, the wild strength of the wolf and the pure, anchoring power of the lineage, created a shield that repelled the remaining agents, not with malice, but with an undeniable force of rightful belonging, a beautiful volatile expression of two souls claiming their true authority over their own destiny. The morning after the confrontation dawned with an almost supernatural clarity, washing Havenwood in soft, golden light that seemed to cleanse the very air of lingering shadows. The remaining coven agents had retreated, their influence broken by the sheer, unexpected convergence of Kaelin's raw loyalty and my activated power. There was no grand political victory, only a profound personal peace. Kaelin stood beside me on the porch of the small shop, no longer wearing the uniform of the sheriff but a simple, sturdy leather jacket, the badge of office willingly relinquished, a final severance from the structure that had tried to control us both. He had chosen the difficult path of independent protector, and I had chosen the terrifying permanence of partnership over the illusion of safe anonymity. The bridal gown lay on the floor inside, no longer a symbol of forced destiny, but a discarded costume, its purpose fulfilled by becoming the fabric upon which our true vows were woven, vows not of marriage, but of unwavering solidarity. He gently placed a heavy silver ring on my finger, not one of ownership but one forged from a piece of raw iron he had unearthed deep in the woods, symbolizing the grounded, undeniable reality of our bond, a bond built in defiance of wicked contracts and ancient rules. "We rebuild now, Clara," he murmured, pulling me close, the deep rumble in his chest a steady, comforting thrum that was now solely for me. Not under someone else's law, but by the strength we found together. I leaned into his embrace, the fear finally receding, replaced by a deep, sustaining love, realizing that fleeing the killer had been necessary, but finding the wolf had been destiny. A destiny I finally had the courage to claim. As the sun crested the horizon, painting the eastern sky in hues of rose and amber, Kaelin turned my face toward the light, and in the perfect stillness of that moment, I knew the running was over. I opened my eyes not to a dusty shop or a dark alley, but to the promise of the dawn, and the last sound I registered was not the roar of a wolf, but the soft, contented sigh of a heart finally irrevocably home.